Hello again. Poor Man's Garage. Something I forgot to mention is about grinding your piston rings. Um, Never deburr your piston rings because when you deburr them, a lot of people run into problems when they deburr them. They deburr them too much. They take too much material off them. They put a bevel on them. So I shouldn't say never deburr them. I mean, you do what you want to do. I don't deburr my piston rings. I rather have them scratch the cylinders than deburr them because I ran into problems before with leak downs that I deburred them too much, and that was my problem with the motor being a bad leak down. Is I hit them with the file too much or sandpaper too much. It makes I didn't realize how much of a difference it makes, but so I don't deburr my piston rings anymore. That's pretty much all I wanted to talk to you about. And I'll get back to you on my next move. Well, hello there, it's John again. All right, well, I figured out my next move. Basically, is the connecting rods. We talked about the oil clearance and the rod bearings. Here's the rod bearings. Here's the standard set. CB 745 H and K. H stands for high performance, N stands for narrow, K stands for tri-armor coating. Okay, here's CB 745 HX and K. We already discussed what the N. It says H stands for high performance, the X stands for extra 1000 soil clearance, the N stands for narrow, the K stands for tri-armor coating. Standard 1000 bigger. Well, anyways, that's what I start with. Small block Ford, what I start with is same journal, 1 and 5. Number one connecting rod. All right, never mix the lower halves of the connecting rods. Number 1, number 5. Remember what I was saying about the radius? The radius always goes to the radius of the crankshaft. The flat sides kiss each other. So this is 1 and 5. So it's going to go set the flat eyes with this flat, radius to the outside, going to go together. 1 and 5 are on the same rod journal on the crankshaft. 1 and 5 go together to crank. So I'm going to start with 1 and 5. So what I'll do is like the crankshaft, 1 and 5 rod journal. Then I'll take these, put a standard set of bearings in them. 1 and 5. Put a standard set of bearings in them, and I will torque these down, both rods, to 65 foot-pounds. When you torque a rod, connecting rod, you have to be very careful that you have some sort of machine surface to hold this rod together. See, this is what I use. I have a piece of, this is machined, two machine blocks, and then put aluminum in the vise, and then the aluminum holds the machine blocks. The machine blocks are going to hold the connecting rod nice and straight while I torque it down to 65 foot-pounds. Anyways, I'll show you what it looks like in the vise. I'll set it up, and then we're going to torque it down to 65 foot-pounds. We're going to have the ARP Ultra torque on the bolts, the head of the bolts, all ARP Ultra Torque, standard rod bearings going in, torque to 65 foot-pounds, number 1, number 5 rod. Like the crankshaft, right? I got it written in the book. And I set the dowel bore gauge to the connecting rod journal on the crankshaft. Set my dowel bore gauge the same dimension as the journal on the crankshaft, connecting rod journal on the crankshaft, 1 and 5. And then once I torque the rods up, I'm going to see what the difference is with the bearing in it. Bearings are in it. I'm going to see what the difference is. Whatever that, when I torque this down, whatever the difference is, that's my oil clearance. I'm going to see what it's going to be. I don't know what it's going to be. It could be 1.5, could be 2. I'm shooting on the rods. I'm shooting for about 2.2. The reason I'm shooting for 2.2 to 2.5 is because the crankshaft and the connecting rods don't expand like aluminum, not like the aluminum block. These are pretty much going to stay the same between 55, which is probably 55 here, it's a little cold, 50 I'd say. You know, between 50 and 180, these ain't going to move that much. If I set it for 2.2, it'll probably be 2.5, 2.6, 2.8 when it's running. And that's about where I'm going to be at. Anyway, so that's what I'm going to do now. I'm going to try to show you what the rod looks like in the vise when I torque it up. Alright. Okay, I got the connecting rod set up in the vise. I'll show you what it looks like. Okay, so here's my precision blocks. There's the connecting rod, piece of aluminum in the vise. Try to get the connecting rod in the center of the vise as much as you can. A lot of guys have connecting rod vices. This is poor man's garage. I can't afford stuff like that, so maybe I could, but not right now. And you look at the connecting rod. There's a gap here. You don't want your connecting rod, you know, hitting your vise. So there's a gap there. It's not much, but there's a gap. So, anyways, these are standard set of rod bearings. Like I said, I mark S on both halves for standard. That's what I'm starting with. You got to mark the connecting rod bearings, so when you start mixing and matching them, you know which ones are the X's and which ones are the standards. So it doesn't matter if you use the upper half or lower half of the X or the standards, it's the same. The X is going to give you 0.5 thousandths increments. Remember that everything you do is going to be in 0.5 thousandths increments. Doesn't matter if it's connecting rods or mains. It's going to be 0.5 thousandths increments. So you got to figure out what's the closest to where you want to be, and you can only get it in 0.5 thousandths increments anyway. So now I'm going to torque it down to 65 foot-pounds. Okay, now I mic'd number 1 and number 5 rod journal. The connecting rod has been torqued down to 65 foot-pounds. I showed you in the vise. And now the outside mic, which I set up in the vise like I showed you before. Okay, so this is the outside mic. And I don't really pay too much attention to this anymore, to what the outside mic reads anymore. This is the dimension of the number 1, number 5 rod journal. This, I made sure that this dimension, I checked it several times, and that's exactly what it is, whatever the distance it is here. So once again, we set up our dial bore gauge. Okay, I'm going to set up the dial bore gauge to 0. Okay, and so this is the size of our connecting rod journal, and then we set the dial bore gauge, and then this rod, number 1 rod, is torqued up 65 foot-pounds, standard set of bearings in it. I'm going to take the dial bore gauge, and I'm going to see what the difference is between number 1, number 5 rod journal and number 1 connecting rod. And we're going to check number 5, of course. So this is what I'm interested in. So what the difference between that number 1, number 5 crankshaft rod journal is, and this connecting rod with the standard bearings. Remember, I marked it with an S. There's the S on the upper half. There's the S on the lower half. And whatever the difference is now I'm looking for 2.2 thousandths is what I'm looking for. 2, somewhere around there. Anyway, so we're going to see what we got. So after I set my dial bore gauge, then I'm going to put this connecting rod in a vise and check it with the dial bore gauge, and we'll see what the difference is, and then so on and so forth. That's how. Anyways, we'll get back to you when I get to that stage. Okay. I kind of wanted to give you guys an idea just how much of a pain in the butt it is to set the dial bar gauge and an outside mic to get it the right way. I spend quite a bit of time making sure that my reading's accurate. Like I said, it's got to be dead nuts, so you gotta really hold this thing steady. Get it right. And I checked this with what I have written down in the book, what I had last time on the rod journals. I always check my book and make sure that this is what I check it 5-6 times, so I know that number 1, what I have on here now is what I had previously. So, and the other thing too is I always back up everything I do here with I'll show you what it is here. Okay. I back everything up with plastic gauge. This is what it is. Still power plastic gauge. See these little lines in there represent, well, small lines means you got 2 thousandths. The middle white ones is got 1.5, and if the big ones represent 1 thousandths. So what you do is this is plastic gauge. You put it on the rod journal or main journal, and then you torque the journals down to specification, and then there's a little piece of string, and whatever it flattens out that string, and then you check with this gauge to see how flat the string has become, and that tells you what your oil bore clearances are. So what I do is I check it with the dial, then I back it up with the plastic gauge, which is probably to most engine builders that'd be kind of overkill, but that's how I do it. I wanted to mention that I got a lot of this plastic gauge kicking around, and all the rods will be plastic gauged, and all the mains will be plastic gauged to back up my dial bore readings in case something's wrong and I'm reading it wrong. I know that when I read 2 on the dial bore gauge and I got 2 on the plastic gauge, guess what? It's 2. So that's how I do it. So anyways, back to this. I think I got it pretty good. You gotta have a steady hand and hold it real parallel to the outside mic. don't breathe. Always set for 0. So now this comes off. This is also got a lock on it. So the lock's locked in. So now this is set for the connecting rod journal. So now we're going to put the connecting rod in the vise. So remember those lint-free surgical rags I was telling you about? Well, that's what they look like. Just like the one in the vise there. You probably can't see it, but you know, drop this down a little bit maybe. Maybe get a better look at it. Hopefully the motor's not in the way. See that there now? I think you can see that. Yeah. Surgical rags. Piece of aluminum in between here. Surgical rag on top of that. Dial bore gauge. When you're doing a dial bore gauge, it always has to be on the upper and lower half is where you set your dial bore. Never on the side or anything like that, because the way the bearings are made is they're narrower on the horizontal where they come together. That's the way bearings are made, to relieve your oil, let the oil flow through. So anyways, we're sitting here, let's see what we got. You gotta make sure it doesn't fall in a little oil hole too. Sometimes you gotta get out your flashlight. Can't see very well. I got exactly 1.5. So 1.5. So standard rod bearings. Standard rod bearings there. 1.5 thousandths on my oil clearance. I want. So basically my choice is 2 or 2.5. That's basically my choice, because once again, if I take the standards out and I replace both halves with an X, I got 1.5 now, I'm going to have 2.5. Or if I take, it doesn't matter, the upper half of the X or the lower half of the X, either one's going to give me a half. You gotta remember that for these I got the oil hole, you gotta remember that. But so either way, I'm either going to be stuck with 2 or 2.5. Pretty much what I'm going to be stuck with. So I got to make up my mind what I want. Do I want 2 or do I want 2.5? Yeah, I'm going to ponder upon it for a bit, and I'll get back to you.